Haven't had any requests for changes to the agenda, so I'll take them in the order that they appear on the agenda. I do want to announce that given our 2-week furlough, the unpaid furlough that starts next week, the appeal period for all items on today's agenda will be extended to Thursday, January 6th. That'll give a couple extra days when we're open for public to come in if they have questions or if the applicants want to talk to their case planners. I don't have any other announcements, right? No? Okay. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to address the staff hearing officer on items not on today's agenda? No, seeing no one, we'll go to the first item, which is 1330 Rialto Lane, if the applicant would like to come up. Yeah, that's fine. Tony will give a brief presentation, and then we'll push the button to turn it on.
Okay, so this is a single-family neighborhood, a one-story single-family residence. It's about a little over 2,000 square foot house and 420 square foot attached 2-car garage. The location is up on the top of the Riviera, sort of the western part of the Riviera. I mean the Mesa. The applicant would like to make an improvement to the house by putting a layer of insulation on the roof and also improving the drainage of the flat roof. That involves just a matter of just a few inches of roof increase. I think the applicant could tell you more detail about exactly what's involved in that. But he would also like to put a parapet-style roof on the house to conceal the new roof improvements and also the existing roof penetrations, and just generally update and improve the existing architecture. The parapet roof would be an increase of about 12 to 15 inches. So the green line here is the property line, and the pink shows the setbacks. The existing house encroaches into the 2 interior setbacks, and the entire front of the house is encroaching into the 30-foot front setback. So wherever the encroachment occurs would be a modification request. So it's 2 interior mods and 1 front setback. This outline, the orange outline of the existing house, is the existing and proposed. There's no footprint change to the structure, just the roof increase. And also indicated on the elevations where the encroachments occur. So this is the street elevation that highlight you see the red line of the setback there, and the yellow is where the roof would increase in the interior setback. Of course, all the way across the front here, here, and here is all in the front setback. So that would be an encroachment. And then the side view, this elevation, the street is out that way. So we see how the front setback is kind of cutting through this way, and the yellow's highlighting those encroachments. On the rear, this entire side of the house is in the setback, so we're talking about that increase all the way down the side of the house. And on this side, the setback angles through, so we just got a little bit of the back corner there. And then the other elevation, the other side elevation, this is the street view. This roof area over the garage would increase, and a little bit of this upper level. They're just doing a little bit, like a double layer 2x4, so about a 3-inch increase to this existing flat roof part. It's not really a full parapet, just a little bit of increase to get the drainage to work coming off of that flat roof.
Okay.
Staff's opinion is that this is these encroachments, the roof getting higher and the setbacks are necessary for an appropriate improvement to improve the roof of the house. It would be very difficult to do it without increasing the height in the setbacks.
Great, thank you. If you'd like to state your name for the record and add any additional comments?
I just push here? Wait.
Yeah, the one the light, okay, push one more time. There you go.
Bart Millar, Home Care Construction, and I'm representing the Andersons. I think Tony's got it pretty well covered. Flat roof residents in a neighborhood where there are a mix of flat and standard roof configurations. What we would like to do is in keeping with the look of the neighborhood and with the look the house was designed to have. Right now we have a permit to do some minor improvements, which includes changing out the windows. When we change out the windows, and this is going to be to insulated windows, when we change out the windows, we're going to have to re-stucco around the windows, and so we're just going to stucco the whole outside of the house, and it's going to be a smooth stucco. This one's currently rough. In the future, we're not planning on doing the roof right now because it's in decent condition, but sometime in the future it's inevitable that the roof will have to be replaced, and then in order to meet code we're going to have to give it at least a 1/4-inch slope, which is going to raise it at the edges above the height. So we have to have some kind of detail to deal with that. If we wait until later when we do the roof work to deal with that, with the stucco, we'll have a patch line all the way around the house, which would not be too nice. And also there are vents and various pipes that stick up through the roof, and since we have a sloped street and a sidewalk that kind of comes down, the top of part of the roof is visible, and the owner would rather the neighbors not have to look at the top of their roof and their vents every time they walk by. And so a modest parapet in a couple of locations seems to solve all those problems at one time.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't have any questions at this time, but I would like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 1330 Rialto Lane? No, seeing no one. We did receive a letter from Ms. Paula Westbury expressing concerns with the project. I don't know if you've seen it. You're welcome to that. So I'll close the public hearing. I read the staff report, and I went out and visited the site, and I agree with staff's analysis and conclusions that the change in the roof height and the setbacks is not going to cause any impacts to the surrounding neighbors, and that it is an appropriate improvement and consistent with the development. And given the orientation of the site and the existing development, the house is located within the setbacks, and to do roof improvements, you have no choice. It's a necessary modification. So therefore, I can make the findings outlined in the staff report and approve your project. There's no proposed conditions, and I don't think I need to add any conditions. And as I did the general announcement at the beginning of the hearing, the appeal period is extended to January 6th. And so if an interested party was to appeal your project, Tony would contact you. Also, the Planning Commission has oversight authority of all my actions that I take, and if they felt this warranted additional discussion before them, they have that same time period to call it up before them. So, okay?
All right. Off to the building department? Is that okay?
Yeah. And you won't be able to pull permits until the appeal period has passed.
Okay.
But you're submitting kind of at your own risk, but you're not prohibited from applying right now.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Barbara, the applicant would like to come up. You can keep the pictures. Yeah. Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Kelly Broadison, assistant planner, and Jeff Shelton is the architect. He is here to represent the project and the applicant. The project is a new single-family residence of 551 square feet with an attached 200 square foot one-car garage. The lot is 1,611 square feet and is in the CM zone, which is light manufacturing. The project site was previously developed with a single-family residence and no parking at the time. Let's see. The neighborhood is at 521 Santa Barbara Street, which is adjacent to Veracruz Park to the rear. And it's surrounded by a mix of commercial and residential uses as well as Veracruz Park. The Design Review Board did review this project on October 11th and forwarded on to Staff Hearing Officer with positive comments. The project does require 3 modifications. The first 2 modifications are 3-foot encroachments into the interior yard setbacks. As you can see from the site plan here, the site is about 28 feet wide. So it would be very difficult to develop a single-family structure without encroaching into the setbacks. Also, the second modification is to provide 1 car garage instead of the required 2. Not ready for those color codes. So you can see here, the first floor you drive into the 1-car garage and there's a 1-car parking spot. And the first floor consists of basically the stairway and a bathroom. And then the second floor consists of the main room and the kitchen. It's a very modest sized home on a very small lot. And staff supports the modifications and recommends that the staff hearing officer approve the modifications and make the findings as described in the staff report.
Great, thank you. If you'd like to state your name for the record and add any additional comments.
I'm Jeff Shelton. I'm Jeff Shelton, I'm the architect for the project. It's green.
No, a little, push it. There you go.
Greener.
I'm Jeff Shelton, I'm the architect for the project. This site's, of course, a small, difficult site with a number of houses with similar sizes on the whole block, and so I tried to emulate those houses. And given the new parking regulations that weren't there when the first houses were put there, I think this is about as good as we can do. We set that parking back 20 feet as required by transportation, so everything's sort of back toward the maximum place it can go. So when they pull in, they're off the sidewalk and such. So I worked as well as I could, but we really need those 3 feet to be able to make this thing work. And it does fit into the neighborhood as the review committee concurred.
Okay, great, thank you. I don't have any questions right yet, but I would like to open the public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 521 Santa Barbara Street? No? We did receive a letter from Ms. Paula Westbury, again expressing concerns with the project here. Welcome to have a copy. So I'll close the public hearing. I went out to the site, visited the site, read the staff report, and I'm impressed that you fit this house on the lot and without asking for more modifications. The lot is narrow, and I can understand needing the 3-foot encroachment. If it was a commercial or mixed-use building, you could build up to the property line. However, since it's residential, you are subject to the R4 standards. So I think the modification, just the 3-foot encroachment, is appropriate. Regarding the parking modification, I know the previous residence that was demolished, 3-4 years ago, didn't provide parking at that time. Like you said, it wasn't a requirement. And transportation staffs looked at this plan, and since it is such a small house, they estimate the demand to be 1 parking space. So the proposed garage does meet the anticipated demand. So the parking modification part could be supported too. The question or comment I have is in regards to the trash enclosure here, that it is proposed within the setback. And generally, we don't like trash enclosures within the setback. It's not really a good neighbor. Looking at this site, I'm not sure where else it could fit. Your garage is pretty close to the minimum that transportation would support.
I'd have to get. They didn't put an inside dimension on here. What
It says 1121.
Wow, because I could put them inside there.
Well, the other option I was thinking of is if you had them open into the driveway,
Yeah, we could do that.
and then this would be a solid wall here.
It'd be better, yeah.
Because this supports the patio above, right? This is an
Yeah,
overhang.
no problem. Yeah, no, and then they could just walk down here, and that'd be fine.
Yeah, so looking at it, I think a good solution, you are requesting a modification to allow, improvements in the setback. So just in approving the project, I'll just have a condition that the doors be facing inward towards the garage.
No problem.
Okay. The other thing I appreciated with the project, and a lot of times with interior yard modification requests, is window placement. And since you're getting close to the property, where are you placing your windows? And it looks like you took that into consideration and having them up front, where in this area it's vacant up here, and then over in this area where it's over a house. So
Tried to minimize on the sides, right?
yeah, so I think that's great. So I reviewed the findings, and I actually wanted to make some changes to the findings. I don't know if staff passed them on. It's just making it more clear, recognizing the constraints of this lot, that it's a small lot, it's a small house, you meet demand. So where I'm changing, the way I want it to read is that the staff hearing officer finds the modifications are consistent with the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance and are necessary to secure an appropriate improvement on the lot. That's the same as what was proposed by staff. But then strike out the next 2 sentences and have it state, the proposed encroachments into the required interior setbacks allows for a small home to be constructed on the small 1,611 square foot lot. The 1-car garage would meet the anticipated parking demand for the 551 square foot residence and would not cause an increase in the demand for parking space in the immediate area. So that would be the revised finding. So with that finding and the condition that the trash enclosure open up on what's inside, towards the house, I approve the project. And then, as I stated at the beginning, and you were here, that the 10-day appeal period has been extended due to our furlough, so it'll end January 6th, and that's the same period that the Planning Commission has to review, and if it raises comments that they believe, or concerns that they believe needs to be addressed at their level, they could call it up during that same appeal period. All right, great, thank you.
Thanks. Have a good one. Thanks.
You too. Okay. The next item is 16 South La Cumbra. Good morning. Hi.
So we should probably, do you want us to start here or wait?
Yes, you can. You're part of the applicant team? Okay, sure. Hi, nice to meet you. Yeah, you can see Mr. Gullett will give us a staff presentation, and then maybe you'll have a chance to do a presentation too.
fast this morning. It's going to be hours.
No, yeah, mods on average, they take about 10 minutes each. Okay, are you ready, Jen?
So, good morning, Ms. Reardon. Dan Gullett, Associate Planner. This is an application for a storefront medical marijuana collective dispensary permit at 16 South La Cumbre. The project location is near the intersection of South La Cumbre and State Street. It's actually in the building formerly occupied by Magnolia 2 Cleaners. The building itself is approximately 926 square feet. Exterior alterations being proposed to comply with the building code are an alteration of the accessible parking space and accessible aisle. Also included is a relocation of the front door toward La Cumbre Road. There's also another door on the north elevation that would be removed as part of this permit. And there are security cameras proposed on the exterior of the building. This application was reviewed by building and safety staff and police department staff. And one of the conditions to enhance security was to include additional cameras to cover all exterior surfaces of the exterior walls. So currently there's no cameras on the elevation on State Street, so they would be required to be added there and along the south elevation on this side as well. This project was reviewed administratively by ABR staff and has been cleared for your review with the condition that it return to ABR staff following a permit approval for plantings in the existing planters along the sidewalk along South La Cumbre. So the amended ordinance limits the number of dispensaries in the city to 3, and it also limits the number of dispensaries per area of the city to 1. And this location is in the outer State Street area, and it would be the only operation in the outer State Street area. There's also a limitation on proximity of dispensaries to each other, and it's 1,000 feet, and the next closest permitted dispensary currently is on Milta Street. Staff again has reviewed the application materials and is supporting this application and recommending approval of this permit. It complies with the limitations on locations, and it complies with the issuance criteria set forth in Section 288070 as conditioned with the additional cameras. So staff is recommending approval of this location. And that concludes staff's remarks, unless Mr. Cano has something to add.
Go over the amended conditions.
There are a couple changes to the conditions that I would like to propose. Condition A, I would recommend that it be changed to say that the operation of the dispensary shall not commence and no building permit may be issued for this improvement, for the tenant improvement associated with this use until such time that, including the subject dispensary, no more than the maximum number of storefront collective dispensaries allowed by the medical marijuana storefront collective dispensary ordinance in the city would be in operation rather than are in operation, because that's a little circular. And the other change would be to the management requirements. There's a typo in that condition. I would ask that the word following be omitted from that condition.
Okay, great, thank you. I do have some questions, but I'll let the applicant make a presentation first, because you might answer some of them. You want to state your name again for the record, and if you wanted to state any...
Yes, of course. I'm Derek Weston. I'm the attorney representing Santa Barbara Patients Group, and I'm also here with Heather Poet Johnson, who's involved with the management, and also Patty Poet is in the audience. So I'll make very brief comments. We appreciate staff's recommendation very much. We think the history of this application is very significant. Santa Barbara Patients Group, in our opinion, is an excellent provider of medical cannabis in the city. They're very proud of their reputation. They've been operating in the 3000 block of State Street for about 10 years, and there never has been a single complaint regarding the providing of their services or anything associated with their work. So they really are very, very proud of the service they provide to their patients. They have worked very closely with the city in making amendments to the current ordinance. We advocated many of the tough regulations that were enacted and worked closely with the city. Unfortunately, we have to relocate from the 3000 block because we happen to be right across from Mackenzie Park, although there is not a record of any single complaint ever with Mackenzie Park relating to the dispensary. During the process, we identified 16 South La Cumbre as an ideal location. The City Council and the Ordinance Committee specifically modified the ordinance to make sure that 16 South La Cumbre would be an allowable location. And to be honest, they did it knowing that we had already secured the right to acquire that property. So we think it's an ideal location and that the city favors that. We have met with staff and explained exactly the changes we have to make. We've worked closely with Captain Armando Martel at the police department. We believe he's also supportive. We think the application is very complete, and either I or Heather will be able to answer any questions you have. I do have one concern about the wording of the condition, even with the change that Dan Gullett has suggested. And the easiest way to explain the concern is to tell you how I interpret it. So the language states that the operation of this dispensary, if it's permitted, will not commence and the building permit not be issued if the maximum number of dispensaries that would be in operation, that's with Dan's change, would exceed the city limit. So the two concerns I have are that we want to be able to pull a building permit, which will take a while to have processed, and then do the construction. So I'd be more comfortable if the restriction on building permit weren't in there, although we still couldn't go into operation if we didn't comply. My bigger concern is that there are two dispensaries that the city has made a decision should be amortized out of operation. If that were not challenged, then this language would not be a problem. But there is litigation with which I am not familiar, and some question whether those will ultimately be permitted. So I think it would, I believe it is the intention of this language that up to 3 new dispensaries could be permitted under the ordinance, whether or not that litigation turns out allowing the other dispensaries to continue. And I'm not sure this says that. So I didn't articulate that very well. It's confusing. I think the solution might be to add the word lawfully in the second to the last line, where it says maximum number of storefront collective dispensaries lawfully allowed by the medical ordinance. And
if that's someone's cell phone, can you turn it off, please?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, she's ducking down.
so the reason I think that wording works is that it'll probably be quite a while before that litigation is resolved. So at the moment, they're not allowed. If you're comfortable with that wording, and if in fact that's your intention, and you state that on the record, then even if someone quibbles about the wording, we'll know what was intended. So our thought is that we should be able to proceed without regard to the outcome of that litigation because it's unresolved at the moment. And I'm concerned with the wording of this clause as it is. So I hope I didn't thoroughly confuse you. We have some people here who would be happy to speak in favor of the reputation of the patients group and the fact that they've been very good neighbors. I'm not sure I have seen any opposition slips, and if there's no one else who wants to speak in opposition, maybe we don't need to do that, or we'll only use it in rebuttal if that's all right. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, I've only received one from Paula Westbury, who follows all our agendas and submits letters on all of them. I haven't received any other ones. I don't know if staff has.
So I don't think we need to submit any other testimony, but if something happens during the hearing, perhaps we can do it by way of rebuttal. Okay. And I just want to make sure you know that there are, 3 or 4 letters from neighbors of the patients group saying that they have been terrific neighbors in the 3000 block of State Street.
Okay, great, thank you. Actually, I would like Mr. Cato to respond to your concern, because I had the same concern reading the ordinance and knowing that the judge has issued the temporary injunction, and what does that mean to the applications that are pending now. And I know Mr. Cato has been heavily involved, so he can respond.
Before I do, I think it's best to have your speakers that are here actually speak into the record their support.
Okay.
Because just you saying that they're here doesn't matter.
Okay.
So I would recommend that. They would get 2 minutes apiece. They don't need to use all that time to say that they support it.
Okay. Thank you.
As far as your concern goes, we have been in contact with the city attorney's office, and their opinion is the 2 dispensaries that are permitted under the previous ordinance that were supposed to be closed by January 29th. If they're allowed to remain, the city attorney's office does not consider them to be permitted under the new ordinance, so they don't count towards the 3. So there's still 2 open spots. 331 North Milpas taking one of the spots, and then 2 open spots. So I'm not sure that we need to make that change. Besides, I'm not even sure that language works, because if a judge says they're allowed to remain, then they're lawfully remaining.
If I didn't mean to cut you off. If I also spoke to Mr. Wiley about this. If that's his interpretation of this clause and that's what's intended and that's on the record, then we're fine.
That's what. Yeah, we received correspondence to that effect.
So I think then that Dan's suggestion of using the word would in the antepenultimate word instead of and, I think that probably deals with the building permit question, because there would not be more than 3, so we should be able to process a building permit, assuming that the application is granted. Okay, so that, Ms. Reardon, that does satisfy my concerns.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a number of questions, but I think I will open the public hearing first and see if any other ones arise, and then we could address them all at that time.
Perfect.
So, are any of those pertaining to 16 South? What you can do is, if you want to come up here and state your name, and then afterwards fill out a speaker slip so we have a record of it. I will note that, as I mentioned, I have one letter from Ms. Paula Westbury.
Have a seat right here. Speaking to the microphone.
She's expressing concerns. It's really hard to read her writing, but she's expressing concerns on the application. Good morning.
Good morning. Being totally unprepared to speak here today, I'll try to do the best I can. But my name is Paul Uesaka. That's Japanese. Our family has been in business since the 40s. Probably, I'm a third-generation Japanese-American property owner here in Santa Barbara in our family. We own property at 3120, 3118 State Street, of which the patients group has been a tenant for several years. In my negotiations with them, initially to place them in the location, I felt immediately a very good comfort level as far as their expertise and the professionalism in entering this sensitive nature type of business. Since they've been there, I have not had one single issue with them as a principal property owner. And they have been an outstanding example of all of my tenants. We have several tenants in town from commercial to residential, and they have been exemplary in their being a excellent tenant. And the family itself has done everything right in terms of this type of business. So that's really what I wanted to say. They have also become very personal friends due to the fact that I use them as an example when I do lease to other people, other tenants, prospective tenants in our locations. Very sad to see them leave because now I'll have an empty building, of which is in these trying, difficult economic times. It's tough to find good tenants like them. So hopefully that concludes my testimony. Do you have any questions of me? Or?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anybody else who would like to open the public hearing or speak against this or speak on this item at 16 South Milpas? Oh, sorry, La Cumbra.
Hi. I'm Dr. Dave Bierman. I'm actually here for the next hearing, but it's the same issue, and that is that we have ill people who benefit from cannabis, and there's no question about that. And there are a variety of dispensaries around. Some are more professional than others, and this dispensary is one of the most professional in the city, and I certainly hope that your actions allow them to remain in continuing to provide the services that they provide.
Great, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 16 South La Cumbra?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Stephen Jose. I'm Dr. Stephen Jose. I have visited this dispensary, and many of my patients have gone there and found it to be incredibly professional. Having one foot in Western medicine and another foot in cannabis medicine, making that transition is always a challenge, is part of the reason we're here. But Heather's dispensary has been incredibly professional. My patients have come back to me and told me about the advice that they've gotten in terms of choices, and I couldn't be happier with how she serves my patients who clearly need her services.
Okay, great, thank you.
That may be everybody.
Okay. Well, let me
I
just
wanted to make sure that my
check.
letter dated December 14th to you is in the record.
Yes, I received it.
And Ms. Reardon, I just wanted to mention that Captain Armando Martel is present if you have any questions about the police department's review of the application.
Okay, great, thanks. Yes, I did receive your letter and read it.
There were also several letters submitted by our current neighbors at 3128, which I believe you got on the 13th. It was, sorry, it was pretty much my first day back from the hospital. But they're in there. There
So
are 5 of them.
we want to make sure that the record includes letters, which I can give you copies of if they're not in here, from John DeMurcus, Nolan Brooks, Edward Beltran, Hugh Lee, and Manuel Brum. And if
No,
you
I
don't,
haven't seen
okay,
any of them.
okay. So these, I'm happy to have you take time to read them. These I'll represent to you. These are all letters from people who are tenants of nearby properties attesting to the absence of problems from the patients group at 3000 block of State Street.
So Mackenzie Market. Try MM Salon and Color Bar. Today's Nails. And Brummis. Okay, great.
Thank you.
I'll give these to Kathy just so she can enter them in. So is there anyone else who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 16 South La Cumbra? No, seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Oh, here's your, I have your letter. I went out to the site visit with Mr. Gullett and read the staff report. And one of the things I noticed, this area, 5 Points and the parking and the neighboring shops, parking is a big issue. And on this particular site, the front building's vacant, and there's a couple of businesses in the back. But when we were there, we watched several people come and park on the site and then walk. One went to the building here, one went to La Cumbra. Is there any lease agreements for this parking space?
With 5 spaces.
For you guys, but any off-site parking agreements? Is it providing parking for other businesses?
I could, to my knowledge, no.
Okay.
So no one has ever asked that question. We do have the exclusive right to, I believe, 5 spaces, which I can show you the lease documentation of. So as I understand your question, has this property owner given the right to outsiders to use this?
And therefore,
I can
is there
make a phone call and try and get an answer, but I have never asked that question. I assume not, but I honestly don't know.
Okay. I noticed there
Do
was
you understand the question, Heather?
Yeah, the concern would be whether there's 5 spaces in here available for the shop or whether they've been...
They are. These spaces are the George Walton trustee, who's the landlord. All of those spaces are property of these 3 properties here. And so the property manager was allowed to then give us those 5 spaces. So people that park in those spaces are doing so by luck because there hasn't been anybody in that space.
Well, that's what I was wondering, since 5 Points is so impacted, people who work there might know, hey, there's parking here, I'll just park here and go walk over to my work. But so I was just wondering, and then the follow-up question would be is whether to sign particular spaces. And my understanding, I know our transportation division doesn't like that because parking lots function better when all the parking's open and available for everybody on the particular site. But given the situation in this particular area and the premium of parking for parking and providing parking, that's something I just wanted to discuss.
If I can comment on that, our lease gives us the right to designate 5 spaces as priority spaces for the patient group. We don't have to do that, but the lease allows us to. So if it's a problem for the city, that's something we could consider. The other thought I have is that the new ordinance requires us to have requires the patients group to have a security guard. So there'll always be somebody present, and I think among his other duties, he can ask people if they're authorized to be there, and that may help minimize the problem.
And Ms. Reardon, I just wanted to note that there is a sign in that parking lot saying that the parking is restricted to the uses of these 2 buildings with a threat of towing those vehicles, but that's not to say that there are lease agreements to other businesses for these.
Well, yeah, I saw there's one somewhere in this area. It's on the low wall, so once you park in front of it, you can't see it. It covers it. So, that'd be another option is enhanced signage on a pole, or that it's visible. People
That
can
states
see it.
only for visitors to the
premises.
premises.
Yeah.
So does staff recommend that we sign those spaces separately or just continue
It's
to
something
sign?
I'm still thinking about because I know our transportation division prefers that it be open for everyone, but it's just an issue I saw. I mean, there was still extra parking available. It just caused me to question is the parking lot being leased out. Then it could be a temporary arrangement while this building's been vacant.
I'm pretty sure no, because the landlord would be in breach of his lease if he had done that. And we're placing a call to the management agent. If I can get you an answer
Okay.
right now, I'll come back.
Okay.
We would also be open to a condition that had us revisit how the signage on the parking lot spaces was handled, 6 months after the operation began, so that you could ask us to make a change. We are anxious to get going, but want to make it work in the most efficient way possible. So if you're unsure the best course, and if the answer is really a little bit of experience, we would have no objection to revisiting that in 6 months or whatever seems appropriate.
Okay. And then, what about bike parking? It's considered a non-conforming situation. I don't remember any up here, and did you notice any?
I don't believe there's any near the back building either.
Having been I know how Five Points is too, and having been a resident of that area in my life for many years, there's less of a concentration of bikes in this area than there would be, say, downtown. I mean, much, much less. Although it would be nice if you recommend that there be some bike parking. We could do that. I just, from what I've seen, doesn't really have that. Although we do have patients that do ride their bikes. So it's...
If I can add to that, I gather that Heather is saying that if you would like us to have a bike parking station, we'd be glad to do it. We would need landlord permission to add that, and I assume it's not a problem, but we'd be happy to ask and do it.
Yeah, thinking of a condition to work with transportation staff on an appropriate location, because it is kind of, I don't know where you would actually put it and if it would fit. But, okay, well, that's just another question.
As long as our landlord allows it, we're happy with that condition.
Okay.
There may be an opportunity next to the accessible space, but it is...
yeah, looking at this, I didn't see where it would fit in this area, that's why I was going to look over, and this part's vacant right now, right?
No, that's
it's
already
behind.
the spa.
Oh, part of it. Okay. And then, in regards to what kind of items you're going to sell, in one part it says not at this time,
Right.
and then in another area it indicated it was. So on page, I don't know, these aren't page numbers. On 8 of the first, your permit application on 8, the question says whether edible. It says medical marijuana in edible form will not be prepared and distributed at the site. But then further back in this section.
The edibles will not be prepared on site.
Okay.
But they will be part of what we offer to the patients, yes.
Okay, well, because it says...
It says prepared and distributed. We did
because it
discuss
says
this.
and?
Yeah.
They are not both prepared and distributed.
But it's going to be off.
Just
So what items are going to be? So just so they...
Raw cannabis, edibles, books.
You got to get on the mic.
Just make it closer to your mouth.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Pull this one over to you, and then she.
Okay. So the raw cannabis plant, the tinctures, edibles, concentrates, and plants for growing, as well as books. We would also like to carry other herbal remedies. Some of our tinctures already have other herbal preparations in them. So we've already sort of gone into that realm, but we would also like to be able to all just botanical herbal preparations, nothing that's even close to being on the drug schedule. So all very, very safe, innocuous herbal remedies I take myself and invite. So go ahead.
If I can add something, I don't think in the application we intended to limit what could be provided to a different standard than what's allowed by the ordinance. So obviously we'll comply with whatever restrictions are in the ordinance, but do you, and I at least have a question whether your intention is to do this subject to a different standard that's in the ordinance, which I think would be a problem.
No, what the ordinance says is that the items sold subject to the, besides the medical cannabis, is subject to the approval of staff hearing officer. So that's why I wanted to know what other items are being sold. It's not to limit what you can do, it's just knowing what you are planning to do so that it's clear in the record as part of what is actually approved here.
Right. And in our application, it does say with prior approval from the staff hearing officer. So we wouldn't, aside from what we just told you, we wouldn't want anything else without approval.
Yeah, have that written in here. I saw that. It does say with prior approval, which also made me think, well, okay, that would be something if you wanted to in the future, you'd come back and ask. Because I didn't see anything spelled out right now, which what you planned on.
Right. Well, right now what we have and what we've planned on are really not that different, with the exception of some herbal remedies just being in and of themselves rather than prepared into the cannabis tinctures. So everything is cannabis based except for the books. But we would also like to be able to offer herbal remedies separately as well.
Okay.
So it's my understanding that she's now giving you a list of the items they intend to offer, and if they have any significant change, they would come back and have a separate request for that.
Would you like a list of the herbs so we can
No,
get on there now? Okay.
And it would be good to follow up in writing what it is.
Of course.
And then a question I had, just for understanding, is our ordinance says it's a member can only belong to one collective. Now, how would you enforce that with all the medical privacy laws? And
Our membership agreement is, let's see, that's exhibit. I do believe that's exhibit G. And right under, let me see.
right
So
here.
there's an application, and then.
So it's just
on
on by
the
them
second
saying
page.
I agree
Right.
to only be involved with one.
Right. It is an act of good faith by ourselves and the patient that they will not be a member of another collective. How we would enforce that is if we find out that they are, then we have to terminate their membership. But it is an act of good faith by the patient that they are saying that they are a member of our collective only.
Okay.
And I'll
And
add
we had
that, in
spoken-
fact, the patient group has terminated patients who have violated the member
Right.
agreement. They really enforce it very strictly.
Okay.
We had spoken with, spoke with Steve Wiley about this a few months ago while we were still in ordinance, because I didn't understand how we could enforce something like that. And that was actually our conversation, that was how you would enforce it, is you would require that the patients agree to it, and then if they, they're found to not have agreed to have violated it, then you have to terminate their membership, which is what we'll do.
Okay. Let me see. I just got to make sure that I've asked my questions of you.
And we will submit a letter listing the products they intend to offer, just so it's in the record. Is that what you'd like?
Yeah. I just want a statement, and here it talks about, you're not allowed to have a doctor on site making recommendations, and you say you currently don't do that. And
Oh, actually, it's funny because this is draft, I don't know, 5 or 6, and in one of the drafts of the application, I not only put that we do not do that, but we are vilely opposed to it. I mean, it's really not appropriate. And it's actually cited in state law that it is completely inappropriate. So we never have, and we think that it is very bad to do so, and would never do so.
So if the application says we're not presently doing it, then maybe we should modify the language.
yeah, but here it just says the patient group never had a physician on site to evaluate. Therefore, it's consistent with the ordinance requirements. So I was just wondering, I was assuming
Never
you were
had,
continuing
never
You can
will,
add, we
never,
will not
yeah.
do so
Okay.
if you wish.
And
I
then
have no
here's actually the part where retail sales, where it talks about in the future and after approval, you may request approval from the show to provide other effective services. So in this area is where you should list what other herbal.
Absolutely.
And may we submit that in a letter after this hearing? Or
Yeah.
do you want us to do it right now?
No, it'd be a condition,
Okay.
just to submit a
Oh, that's
revised
perfect.
plan.
I understand. So prior to issuance of a permit, there would be a written statement of what will be provided.
Then the other part, just to make clear, and I know you're aware of it since you've been in the hearings on the amendments and stuff, is to make it clear in your operations plan that there's a 24-hour waiting period for new patients. It talks about your process and how you verify the recommendations, and it doesn't state that the new patients need to wait 24 hours.
Right. Okay. I'm very sorry.
We are aware of that requirement, and we'll make a statement on the record that yes, we will comply. And if you would like us, we'd be happy to have a condition that the operations plan would reflect that requirement before issuance of a permit.
It's in the membership agreement. But
I think you're right, Ms.
Yeah,
Reardon,
it's
that the
fine.
operations plan should include that statement, and we can do that prior to issuance of a permit.
Okay, so in terms of the issuance criteria that I review the applications against, that you are in compliance with the Capacity Use Act and Senate Bill 420, you are not in an area identified as high crime or increased crime. There hasn't been any significant numbers of calls for service. It's appropriate size. It will serve the needs. You're in an allowed location. Your site plan, floor plan, security plan, incorporated features. I think your security plan was really clear. It was
Thank you.
good, provided a lot of detail and an explanation. I think even you can use it for staff training. I don't know if that's the purpose of it or not. If you're,
yeah, it is.
yeah, so all reasonable measures have been incorporated into your security plan. There's likely to have no potential adverse effects on the health or safety of persons that are working in that area. You haven't violated any existing code requirements, or you stated you haven't made any false statements. So I think I can find your application meets the criteria with the additions that we had talked about regarding the waiting period and selling of other items in that. So in regards to the conditions, I agree with staff's recommendations. I had the same question on number F regarding the management requirements. I had questioned it, so you crossed out following. I would like to add a couple conditions regarding the parking. Work with transportation staff and the management company to come up with either enhanced signage. I think the last choice would be to actually assign the parking, because I agree, I think it's good to keep it open. What happens if year 5 are taken up? I think it's better to have it open. So if you can work with transportation staff to kind of review the signage and see if it should be raised on a pole or placed in a more appropriate, more visible location. And then also with bike parking, I'm not going to make it a requirement, but again, if you could work with transportation staff and with the management company to explore locations for bike parking on site. Because if people are riding bikes, so they're just going to be parking it against the side of your building, and it'd be nice to provide a place for parking.
So both those conditions are acceptable and very good ideas, so we'll do that.
Okay. And then I would, not with the submittal of building permits, but like within, I don't know if you can do within 30 days, submit a revised operation plan, making those changes, including the lists of items that you're proposing to sell, as we discussed today, making it clear about the 24-hour waiting period. About the physician, it's your intent not to have a physician on site. I think those were the 3.
I think that was a typo because I had taken.
I've cut
So
it.
within 30 days, we'll submit a corrected operation plan that lists the items that we intend to offer for sale, that references will comply with the 24-hour waiting period, and that confirms that we will not have a physician on site.
Correct. So with those changes to the conditions of approval, I approve your requested permit. And as I said at the beginning of the hearing, I'm not sure you guys are in here, given the 2-week furlough that starts next Monday, the appeal period is extended to January 6th, which is the Thursday after. So it gives people time, they have tomorrow and Thursday, and then they'll have the 4 days, because we're closed on Friday because of Flex Day. So the 10-day appeal period, or the appeal period is not 10 days, but it's extended to January 6th.
I understand. Thank you. I do want to clarify that the change that Dan Gullett suggested of the word would for and on the first condition, that's included.
Yes, that one, and then F, too.
I'm not sure I know that one.
F, it had an extra, the N started with the following operational standards, and there was no operational standards listed. What he meant was just that the operational standards and requirements in the municipal code that you agree to operate under. And then also, the Planning Commission has oversight authority of all my actions, and they review them, and if they have concerns or they feel this warrants discussion before them, they have the ability to call it up during that same appeal period. And if that was to occur, Mr. Gullett would contact you.
So absent Planning Commission action, it won't go before the Planning Commission. They have to take initiative.
Right, absent an appeal or being called up. Okay. And this would be your final step, and then design review.
I want to say on behalf of the patients group that we appreciate all the time and effort that Dan Gullett and Danny Cato put in it, and I'm very impressed by how thoroughly you've reviewed this application.
Great. All right. Thank you.
And do you want this back?
You can keep it for your records. Okay, the next item is 2915 De La Vina, if the applicant would like to come up. Sorry. Good morning. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, anytime.
This application at 2915 De La Vina Street is also an application for a medical marijuana storefront collective dispensary. There is a dispensary in operation at this location currently. The building is approximately 1,060 square feet. This is the C2 and SD2 zones. And the building is near the intersection of De La Vina Street and Arden Road. It's this building here. And this location is in the Upper De La Vina area of the city that's delineated specifically for the dispensaries. This would be the only location in this area. It's marked here. And again, there are no other dispensaries within 1,000 feet of this location. And with following the amortization of the non-conforming dispensaries, the dispensaries with permits issued would be 331 North Milpas, 16 South La Cumbra now, and 2915 De La Vina. So that would meet the city's limit of 3 dispensaries in the city. So again, this application was reviewed by building and safety staff and police department staff. And the exterior changes to the site include provision of an accessible parking space and an accessible aisle for the parking space, and a new trash enclosure and new landscaping in the parking area. Currently, this area in the back of the site, there's a patio that would be removed here. And I spoke further with building and safety staff with regard to this door in the back of the building. It appears that this door doesn't actually meet the accessibility code because it isn't level on both sides of the door. So it appears that door would need to be removed as for compliance with the building code. And the project also includes a new path of travel and new landscaping in the front of the building. And police department staff also would like a condition added that the exterior windows of the building either have bars placed on the outside of them or there's breakage sensors attached to the alarm system to each of those windows. So that's a condition that staff would recommend for this project. In terms of issuance criteria compliance, there are a couple outstanding issues that the city has with this application, and one has to do with the legal status of this operation. The code allows grandfathered in dispensaries to amortize over a certain period of time, but it does require that those dispensaries not discontinue operations for any period of more than 30 days. So the city attorney's office is contending that this operation actually discontinued for a period of more than 30 days at one point. And if that is the case, then the current operation is not legal, and that if that's true, staff could not make could not state that criterion 12 is met in the affirmative, because that criterion states that the applicant is not engaged in unlawful, fraudulent, unfair, or deceptive business acts or practices with respect to the operation of another business in the city. That there's actually a suit that was filed by the city against the applicant regarding the legal operation of this dispensary currently, and that court case is scheduled to be heard in June of next year. The other issue is that this dispensary has been using as a community storage facility in downtown, and there was a burglary at that facility very recently. There was a police report filed on November 23rd, and there were 50 pounds of marijuana that were stolen from that facility prior to that. Staff's concern is the negligence of the applicant in terms of providing appropriate and adequate security of the product. It was only secured with a padlock, and the top of the storage unit was just chicken wire, so it was relatively easy to break in and remove the marijuana. So staff's due to this, staff is hesitant on finding compliance with issuance criterion 9, which states that the storefront collective dispensary is likely to have no potentially adverse effect on the health, peace, or safety of persons living or working in the surrounding area, contribute to a public nuisance, or result in illegal drug activity, because that burglary did result in illegal drug activity, and that is in a large quantity of marijuana to find its way illegally onto the streets. So staff is recommending denial of this application because of inconsistencies with criterion 9 and 12. If you do find that this application does comply with the ordinance, staff also has some recommended changes to the conditions of approval. Condition of approval A, staff would recommend that the same change that was made for the previous application be made, which is the limitation on the number of dispensaries in the city, just to clarify that. Also, with the submitted operations plan, it was missing provisions to address public nuisance, loitering adjacent to the dispensary, and addressing trash, litter, and graffiti. So staff would recommend that operations plan be resubmitted that addresses those issues. Also, with condition E, since this is an operating dispensary, the situation is different than with 16 South La Cumbre, so staff would recommend that language be changed to provide some time limits associated with building permit issuance and final inspection. So the language change that staff would recommend is that within 60 days of approval, that the applicant shall obtain a building permit for improvements in conformance with the plans submitted November 22nd, 2010, or is modified by the building official. Following that, within 60 days of building permit issuance, these improvements shall be completed and shall have cleared final building inspection. And staff also has the change to the management requirements to remove that typo with the word following in that section. So again, unless Mr. Cotto has anything to add, that concludes staff's remarks.
Okay. I do think I want you to address the security part, but maybe I'll have the applicant do his presentation first, and then. Okay. Hi. You want to state your name for the record?
Sure. My name is Patrick Formey, and good morning, Ms. Reardon, Mr. Gullett, and Mr. Cotto, and Captain Martell. I'd like to begin actually with the issue that was last brought up, which was the recent burglary. We had this facility is downstairs and needs a passcode to get in. It's not the first year that we've stored cannabis there, and the padlock was severed. It has nothing to do with any chicken wire being exposed, and unfortunately, the incident did result in cannabis leaving the facility and going into the hands of someone. And in life, sometimes fate plays a very interesting role. I've been in the court case with the defendant who was caught with the cannabis, and spoke to both the prosecutor and the public defender who's defending him. And the person now, he was a junkie, and I witnessed that firsthand in court. And he is now in an STP program with in jail, and no one has paid for his bail, or nor did he. And so this particular incident in this particular case has resulted in a change of life pattern for this particular gentleman, and there's going to be no jury trial and be plead. I was communicated by the sheriff, our narcotics officer in the sheriff's department communicated with me, and we had a very informal and discreet conversation about exactly what had occurred. And I explained to him exactly the full circumstances, and he advised me to go file a police report because his motivation was to get the cannabis back to us. I then contacted another narcotics detective in the Santa Barbara Police Department who I have relations with and felt comfortable with, as I do Captain Martell, and communicated with him the full gamut of what's going on. For it now to be used by the staff as a condition for a denial sort of negates the earliest communication that I received from Mr. Gullett, which is that there's going to be changes now to, and maybe we can specify that in a second, there's changes now that he and I have agreed to that would make the storing of the cannabis on site a prerequisite. So the idea that somehow we would be a continued nuisance or we would be a nuisance with this new caveat is something that I must contest, and that this is the first instance, aside from a 2007 burglary break-in through a glass that had been, it was supposed to be secured glass with the wires through it. A large rock was thrown through it, and we've since changed that to a steel door or a metal door. And so we've taken care of addressed that particular issue. So yes, it's unfortunate. Yes, it did occur. But at the same time, the way I've seen it, I didn't sit through this, I sat through his court hearing, and I didn't sit there as someone who was an adversary or felt that somehow we had been wronged by this person. I left feeling sorry for this person, and the fact that his life may be in the better is great. We were also asked to file a return of property at the district attorney's office, in which we did, and that is now being under review, and we're going to be taking that matter up in the future. But it was really the communications from the sheriff's department, which were, one, favorable of us, and two, they'd like to get us our cannabis back. And I'd like to add at this point, just on that particular item, is that we were referred to by the police department and the sheriff's department. Patients come to us that have references from or are being referred to by the police department and the sheriff's, aside from doctors' recommendations. So that is also, we feel, a something that shows the professionalism of the or the comfort level that the police and the sheriff have with our operation versus others potentially in town. That is that. And in terms of that particular issue, maybe Mr. Gullett can reiterate at this moment sort of what...
I'd like you to continue on with your presentation and the merits of the case that
Okay.
you want to present to me.
Okay, sure. Sorry.
That's okay.
So, so just in termination of that, there is a new caveat which states that the cannabis that comes to the dispensary stays on dispensary property.
Correct. I saw that condition of approval, that all of it needs to be stored on site.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So I've agreed to that informally with Mr. Gullett and can formally do it in language at another time.
Okay.
There are really two issues here. One is the history of the dispensary in the community and the efforts by the staff and the nurses at the dispensary and their prolonged activity in Santa Barbara over nearly 11 years. And there's another issue of whether we were closed or not for 30 days or whether we had to go underground inside the building because of actions done by Christy Stanley, which I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read the letter that I submitted yesterday. Mm-hmm. If you did, that's important because that kind of is an overmind or an overview about the context in which this accusation is being drawn. I'd also like to point to this exhibit here, which I found in the planning department. I was trying to find all morning, and I'm glad it surfaced because during the time in question, which we were said to have not been at the building, you'll see that in the back of the building, there's two large 16-foot storage containers that are ours, that are part of this operation in the back. And they go to provide the fact that it's one more bit of evidence, and this was not submitted to the city attorney's office, and I'll explain that in a second. But this, and I did receive a copy, and I had them date at the planning department when the copy was made, when this aerial photo was taken, and it was during the time in question. So there's two issues here. One is how long we've been in operations in town and the professionalism which we've conducted ourselves. From the get-go, we approached Harriet Miller, and Mr. Garcia, Gil Garcia, was going to be here today, but he has a medical appointment, and he will be speaking to you later. And the reason I bring his name up is because he was part of the ordinance committee 11 years ago when there was an attempt by myself and Marty Blum, head of the ordinance committee, and Cam Sanchez had just come down, and three other of his officers had been meeting with city staff to create an ordinance. And I asked Harriet, because I've been going to Sacramento, I said, look, these other MOUs and other things that are on the books, and we'd like to create, I said, Santa Barbara is going to inevitably get some sort of dispensing cannabis operation in town, and it's important that there be a check and balance open book model that be accessible to patients that normally would not have access or exposure to cannabis, namely people going through chemo and other things. And so it was my intent to work on this, and I spent a lot of time in Sacramento and different places to find models that were looked at by legal personnel that would be suitable. That in turn started the ball rolling. I spent numerous nights or afternoons with Bob Pike, then city attorney, in his office working on the ordinance, as well as with Marty Blum, who was then the ordinance committee chair and not a mayor yet, and Harriet and the police department. I made the mistake, as I mentioned in the letter, that I phoned Tom Sneddon and asked Tom for his guidance and help, and thought that the idea of the city staff, the police department, and the district attorney's office should be that trifecta should be in place in order to help with this particular model that was going to be manifesting. Tom Sneddon refused to meet with Marty Blum or the city, and shunned us all, and that was the end of that in terms of trying to work with him. And time went on, and it became laissez-faire here in town for quite some time. And that opened the door for other people to come into town which are no longer in town or are facing prosecution right now, and others to begin, quote-unquote, setting up shop, let's say, for lack of a better term. It wasn't until the Glen Mauer situation that erupted over on Victoria Street, which really brought everything to a head, and that forced the city then to create a moratorium on new dispensaries to be opened up. There was a 6-month moratorium in order to create an ordinance. The ordinance there was a lot of time and pressure on the particular ordinance committee and the city council to create an ordinance within that 6 months, not realizing that they could have just, if they needed more time, extended that 6-month moratorium for however long they needed in order to create a complete ordinance. That ordinance was passed, and the ordinance basically communicated that anybody prior to the certain date that was in operation had 3 years to comply and seek a permit from the council, the planning department, and anybody post that needed to go through the process of the permit process. I reviewed the ordinance and found what I felt was about 3 or 4 flaws that I think were trouble, which then came back later, 2 years later, to haunt, or about a year and a half later, to haunt the city council in creating their new revised ordinance. And I sat down with Marty Blumman and one other council member in Marty's office, and I expressed to her that there's no limits on the amount of dispensaries in town, that they're only limited by their radius to each other and to schools and to parks, and that there's no provision here from people coming from outside of town to come up here and quote-unquote set up shop in Santa Barbara. And there's no provision, too, for any kind of medical aspects to these dispensaries. And fourthly, there's no funds or revenue for the city that could be appropriately taxed at this point for some sort of administrative trade-off so that they could pay for the time of the police department. At the same time this was going on, Christy Stanley and the DEA and the Justice Department and the Office of Forfeiture came to town and asked that all landlords and their attorneys be present at the DA's office. I want to say August 6th of 2007 or 8. I'm not sure the date. I think it was 2008. And the purpose of that was to further intimidate any kind of dispensary operation in Santa Barbara. This came on the heels of the amount of work that Mr. Cotto had been doing primarily, along with Steve Wiley and the Ordinance Committee, and prepping all this material for something that was restrictive, strong parameters, and that there could be accountability and oversight. So it really felt like DA Stanley, not only did she undermine the city at the particular time, but went against all the work that other officials had been doing. And then I went to Mr. Wiley and I said, and to others with this letter, not only did I go to the district attorney's office and contest this idea that this DA's office be used to do federal enforcement work when the DA is supposed to uphold state law and she's completely in violation of her duties based on the Bill Locker's directive to all law enforcement and people in that nature. And so then I took the letter to Mr. Wiley and I explained to him what was going on as well as the mayor. And at that point, Mr. Wiley mentioned, I talked to him and I said, should I go to the media with this? And he goes, it can't hurt. So then I went to the media, Mr. Welsh, and he's here on just reporting matters, but he could actually be a witness if he'd like to. And I said to them, okay, I said to them that this is an important situation. They in turn phoned DA Stanley, and the rest is actually in that communication to you. So I'll wrap up on that particular thing. In terms of the operations, we're the only RN collective staff membered operation in the whole state, and in the country for that matter. We've also helped the Rhode Island, the people in Rhode Island sort through how to create a compassion center collective there. I work with the elected officials there. We've also put on cannabis therapeutics conferences every 2 years with a group called Patients Out of Time. The last one was in Rhode Island, but the 2006 one was in Santa Barbara with Marty Blum and Harriet Miller both keynoting the event and put on by and facilitated by Santa Barbara City College. These events bring numerous physicians and clinicians from around the world to come to bring their evidence and to show the benefits of medicinal cannabis. And this is an accredited course offered by the UCSF School of Medicine. The 2008 conference was in Osilomar, and we filmed it using 4 to 5 high-def cameras. And then we prepared the first ever online course at the University of California School of Medicine for all doctors and clinicians in the state to now review that material and receive their continuing education credits. So I have a med background. I've done 3 years of pre-med, and both the landlords at the 119 North Milpas is a physician, and the landlord at 2915 are physicians, and they both know or one is now deceased, but they both, one did know, and one knows the medicinal benefit of cannabis and received support from them for this particular work. The reason that there should be a nurse involved in this is because this is a medical issue, and if a doctor is going to recommend a patient to go to a facility, I think the comfort level is extremely important for that patient to feel with the nurse, and also the level of knowledge that nurse holds. Many times you'll find these dispensaries are, could almost look like a tattoo parlor at some point. There really isn't much of professionalism, and it's gone a little bit muck in California. So we've always stayed the course with RNs and with our model, and we also pay for the RN to go to different cannabis therapeutics conferences around the state and around the country to keep on the current knowledge. With that in mind, we've been in operation for over 11 years. There's not one time been a complaint from the school board. There's not one time been a complaint from the police department, and there's not one time been a complaint from the city attorney's office, aside from this caveat here. I expressed to you in the letter a little bit about the dynamic in which the pressure was coming down on different dispensaries in town, and so that is important to understand. In terms of a permit being assigned, I've reviewed all the conditions of approval, and I've agreed to do every single one of these approval reviews. I, like the last applicant, had a bit of trouble understanding the complexity of what Mr. Wiley is facing with this, with the injunction. I've read all the cases. I've read the case where Mr. Wiley has been sued, or let's say the city has been sued, and Mr. Wiley's resuing or countersuing, and I read the federal decision on, and I know that it's a sticky business right now, and I'm sure a lot of people have questions, and even though Danny made a presentation today about how that may come about, I'm glad to hear that'll be looked at as not interfering with these other permittees' potentials. So, as you can see, I could go on for quite a while, and but I can tell that there needs to be a wrap up, and so I have no questions really about this. I just, like I said, contested the idea, or now we have made a correction based on Mr. Gullett's recommendation. We made a correction in terms of now any cannabis that comes to the dispensary will be stored on site, and then also I've also supplied a list of people in the Attorney General's office that I've been working with over the years, including Bill Lockyer, and I can further augment that with proper phone numbers. I also recommended speaking with Marty Blum, even though she recommended or was one of the dissenting votes on the earlier ordinance. She has been a witness to the whole work, and I haven't communicated with her, so and I won't. And you can just take it at face value, so that she is not at all communicated with or coached, let's say, for lack of a better term.
I do have questions for you, so
Okay.
you'll be able to explain things more later.
Okay, then I'll wrap it up then.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Sure. Captain, I would like to ask you some questions. And thank you so much for coming. I know you're well aware of the ordinance. You sat with Danny through many committee meetings and stuff.
Right.
But in specific, the operational criteria that I need to look at talks about the dispensary's operation plan, its site plan, its floor plan, and the proposed hours of operations, and the security plan has incorporated features necessary to assist in reducing potential crime-related problems and as specified in the operating requirements of this section. And, given the history, I know it was an off-site robbery, and there was an instance here several years ago. And looking at the plan, the security plan, and with the fact that storage is going to now occur on site, you feel comfortable with the plan? I had a question regarding the back door, the rear door and entries, but Mr. Gullitz explained it needs to be removed because of the building code requirements. But just in terms of help of making this finding that the property won't cause an adverse effect with the safety of people in the area. And, they've incorporated all appropriate measures to help reduce the potential for crime-related issues on the site.
Right. The police department's always been very concerned about security aspects of these type of dispensaries because of just past history. Since they've been around, there's been burglaries, there's been robberies, there's been a lot of people affected by just their mere presence, or patients or employees, people being affected by them by the lack of security. In this premise, we went out and looked at it, and yes, I didn't like the back door when I went there. It was wood at the time, and it looked like it had a board holding it, and I think it was probably fairly well sealed, but it could be attacked. That was the same issue I had with the windows on the north side of the building, which appeared to be glass, and then there was it looked like they've been sealed with either wood or drywall. This premise has been broken in before, somewhere in 2006, 2007, as the owner stated. But it's also been tested before by its alarm system. It's got an alarm system which works well. In 2010, we've gone out to reports of an alarm, so we've been there, and it's still been secure enough. But I feel very concerned about those windows because, like anything else, it's the easiest place to attack. That or vents and things like that because it is an older structure. So that's why I recommended the additional security of those windows, because if I were to attack that place, that would be probably one of the most vulnerable places. That or any attachment to that premise, such as vents, and I think they got an AC unit, things like that. The cameras in there, and I think they may even have a motion sensor. Those are all good to have, but there's nothing like having the breakage alarms to the windows, because it gives us that added time element that we need to get there to be able to assist the property owner or people that are potentially in there from harm.
Okay. The other question I had relates to the ordinance, and it says the proposed location of the storefront collective dispensary is not identified by the city chief of police as an area of increased or high crime activity. I don't know that we have any areas of high crime areas in the city, do we? How would we? There's been calls for service. I looked through the report that was in here. It looks like no real issue. But when would that be triggered? What would be considered?
Well, at any given time, anywhere in the city, you can have potentially pockets of high crime activity. Mm-hmm. I would say that the city is generally fairly safe, but there is potentially an area that can flare up. And then it's our responsibility to, one, identify it and then address it. So when we look at these high crime activity areas, we look at the areas of potential flare-ups. So we look at it in that fashion. Mm-hmm. So when an applicant comes through, we then look at the area based on statistical data that we have through reports of crime, the sheer location, its proximity to other things. And in this area, I didn't see any of those. Mm-hmm. So I would say that area is fairly safe in regards to that level of activity. In regards to the actual location, the only reports that we have are the burglary that occurred there, and then the alarms just recently that have spurred during 2010. That concerns me because it appears that either there's an issue with the alarm or there's an issue of someone trying to break into the business. Mm-hmm. But again, that's something that the owner has to take care of. That's in regards to that question.
Okay. And then this is just a question on the ordinance. The next one says, for those applicants who have operated other storefront collective dispensaries within the city, that there have not been a significant numbers of calls for police service, crimes, or arrests in the area of the applicants of the former location. What would you consider a significant number of calls over, what period of time?
Well, I think every call is unique. I would look at the history of the business in regards to the type of calls. I don't look at number of calls as a negative thing. I look at that as a positive thing, because one, they're being responsive to their community. If they have issues, they need to call us for us to resolve them for them. The other thing is the lack of calls can concern me. One was this burglary. He didn't call to report it until he was contacted by law enforcement. But in regards to that business itself, in regards to the number of calls, I think it's very consistent with what other dispensaries in the area have gotten. Some of them have been broken into, some of them have been robbed, but they've made those reports. So I think it's very consistent with what I've seen in regards to the number of calls. I was concerned about this last event in regards to the burglary, and I was very concerned about the storage outside of this business. So that is an issue that I do have.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you were communicated about the new caveat that is in the criteria to be met, which is that all cannabis coming to the dispensary be stored on site, and has been agreed to. So I just wanted, I'm not sure if, did you know about?
Yeah, there's a section here, and I've got it. I printed the section where it talks about it needs to be stored on site, especially after hours. I think it's a form of common sense in regards to, we talk about security, and we've done it for years. And I think if you've gone to any of the meetings, I've mentioned all the incidents of crimes that have occurred, and I think there wasn't a lot of common sense used or a lot of thought process used if you're going to use a public storage to put a product where anywhere else we'd have alarms, security guards, you name it, to protect the product. The product happens to have a lot of value at this point in time. So, when I find and I hear about the report of it being stored in public storage and it being stolen, then actually found that it's actually made it to the streets to illegally being sold, that's a concern.
And Ms. Rudin, I just wanted to mention that that condition regarding the storage of the medical marijuana on site when it's provided by the collective, that condition was placed on 16 South La Cumbre also, and it is recommended to be placed on this project in light of that burglary.
Okay, great, thank you. I think those are all my questions for you.
Okay.
Thank you. I have other questions,
Sure.
but I'll open the public hearing first, because there
Okay.
might be some more that arise.
And I just had, I omitted just one response to, if I can just say for the record, that I talked to the neighbors, and I didn't hear from one neighbor that had any complaints ever from us. And there is a stack of letters from all the neighbors that I contacted with, except for two neighbors that haven't yet submitted theirs in time, and that would be supplemented. And that's Calendar Glass, and that's also Jensen's. And so in the future, if I can augment the file with just those two, and that's it. And also, I guess if you'd like me to either discuss this one thing, or would you rather hear from them
Not
and I
right
can
now,
respond to it later? Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, could I speak out of rotation here? Because I have patients I have to...
Sure.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. I'll let you go first. Let me find your... Okay, we'll start with Dr. David Berman.
Hi, I'm Dr. David Bierman. I'm the Vice President of the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine, and our Reason for being is to try to marginalize those doctors that are practicing minimalist medicine in regards to recommendations and approval of the medicinal use of cannabis. I'm just back from Jerusalem, where I attended a 4-day conference in honor of Raphael Mechoulam, who's a scientist that isolated THC in 1964. I can assure you that there are many physicians who take this very seriously and are very well informed. And we look forward to being able to deal with professional organizations. Just last week, I had a woman who was undergoing chemotherapy and who was very anxious about using cannabis. She was there because she had a number of symptoms, nausea, decreased appetite related to her treatment, and she felt uncomfortable about, and she was comfortable enough to talk about cannabis coming to a doctor's office, okay, but what about the dispensaries? And it was reassuring to her to know that there was a dispensary in town that had nurses there, and I think this professional structure is really important. And if you've read any of my op-ed pieces in the news press, you know that I've said that dispensaries should be subject to similar regulations as pharmacies. And my father was a pharmacist. His pharmacy which had bars on the window, was broken into more than once. Of course, it had been there for many, many years. And I think that if you look at the area where this is, it's a high medical area. It's in the sphere of influence, if you will, of Cottage Hospital. You've got other medical facilities in that area. The materials that they have there are safer than some of the over-the-counter preparations that are available at the grocery store that's nearby. It is certainly my number one choice for a place for a mature patient who has a serious medical problem who gets relief from cannabis to go. Because in the other facilities, you don't know for sure whether or not you're going to have a clerk who's 25 years old or 21 years old. In this facility, you know that you're going to have a nurse who is not only a nurse, but has the professional knowledge of the medical utility of the cannabis and of the science that stands behind that. So, as somebody who, has been involved in getting people to take a look at this the same way we look at other medications, I could go on for hours, but A, I've got to run, and B, you've got other things here. I think it's important to recognize that the voters of the city of Santa Barbara have indicated that they want to have dispensaries, they want to have well-run dispensaries. This is a very well-run dispensary, and it has the added advantage of having a nurse there. I have been critical of the city council for not making the ordinance tough enough. I think they should have required that the clerks be older, have a certain age thing. I think they should have required that either a nurse or a pharmacist be responsible. I think to deny this dispensary is to go backwards. It's to endorse lower standards of practice than I would endorse. And I've been very much involved in standards. I'm the past medical director of the Medi-Cal Managed Care Program here in town, now called SenCal, used to be called Santa Barbara Regional Health Authority. And part of my responsibility was to take a look at quality of care issues. And while you've identified certain things that need to be corrected, I have full confidence that they will be corrected. I think that this is a quality dispensary, and these are the kinds of standards that the city of Santa Barbara should aim for, and I certainly hope that they amend their ordinance to make it tougher so that we only have dispensaries of high quality that are operating here, and that their standards are similar, if not identical, to the standards that we require for pharmacies. Thanks for listening to me. Thanks for letting me go early. Appreciate it.
I forgot to mention, and I think Mr. Cotto did earlier, there's a 2-minute time limit for, given the number that we have for speaking. So the next person is Karen Bradshaw. That'll be followed by Robert LaPrade.
Karen and I are here in opposition. Is that okay to speak at this
Yes,
time?
yeah. Okay, are you part of Karen?
We're partners together in a business which is 2 doors down. Jeff Briggs and Karen Bradshaw.
Okay, so you want to go together?
That'd be great. If we
Okay,
could.
sure. Or, yeah, you can click on this one.
Is this
However
okay?
you want. Yeah, however, and you can stay up here. Well, you guys have both of those. Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you for the opportunity. As I said, both Karen and I are partners in a business at 2905 De La Vina. So we are separated by one vacant building away from the applicant. We purchased a franchise, the Daily Method, which is, to give you a little background, it's an exercise studio. It incorporates a balance bar, uses yoga and dance. The demographic for the class is typically women between 30 and 50 years of age. Very often bring their young children with them. We have classes that incorporate children in the class, similar to like a Mommy and Me type of exercise. The Daily Method has currently about 25 franchises across the country. We think it's a beautiful, very nice studio. We think it's going to bring the type of demographic to the area that will really improve the area. We don't feel that our business, the exercise studio, is compatible with a dispensary 2 doors down. We stay open until 8 o'clock. As I said, children are often at the classes. We have submitted our building permit and application to the city, and we hope to open in March. So this goes to this, I believe it's criterion 9 as to what the impact of the dispensary would have on our business, and we just don't think that it's a compatible use. We talked about availability, and I understand that the doctors have testified to the importance of this. That's obviously open, to some debate. But in terms of availability, the dispensary at the Five Points location, I met Karen up at Starbucks right there. I left our property and was up there in, I think, about 3 minutes. I left 5 minutes and I got there in 3. So we have another dispensary that's less than 5 minutes away. So to say that there's not availability for this close by, I don't think is realistic. So anyway, so we don't think that the use is compatible. We looked at other areas. We looked at Ventura and Camarillo, and we selected Santa Barbara. We're very happy to be here, and we think it's going to bring a great business to the area. If this does go through, we first found out about this and through the notice, then we may well exercise our rights under the lease and terminate, which we don't want to have to do because we think this is going to be a great business for the area. So, Karen, did you want to add?
I don't have anything to add. Just my concern of then storing the cannabis on site is then, well, great, is the person that was breaking in downtown or the storage facility going to be coming around my building when I have instructors there late at night, alone, in the dark? Is it a safe environment? And I would have concern for that.
And just one final thing I forgot in closing. In terms of no incidents in the area, 3 weeks ago, someone walked by and broke a window in our location. We didn't file a police report for that, but I do have the repair to repair the window. It wasn't something thrown from a car. There wasn't a rock or anything, so someone had walked by and smashed our window in. And I'd be happy to submit that repair order if that would be helpful.
And just to clarify, we've leased the building that was Jensen's Guitars. So that's probably why you haven't heard back from them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Robert LaPrade? LaPrade, sorry. And followed by Joe. Thanks. Yeah, sure.
Is this your purse?
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a patient, and that's all I can really talk about. At the Compassion Center, I started going about 5 years ago, and that was at De La Vina. I'm sorry, on Milpa Street. And I had a number of health issues, including stenosis and back surgeries. And when I went to the Milpas, the Milpas location, I had problems because I couldn't climb the stairs. So I talked to this nurse. She allowed my wife to act as my caregiver so that I could obtain it. I've often talked to the nurse about my problems because I have glaucoma, stenosis, 3 major back surgeries, and the reason I have my medical marijuana prescription is because of PTSD. I'm 100% disabled, a Vietnam veteran. Marijuana helps me with my dreams. It sounds funny, but that's what it helps me with. With my back pain, it helps me with that. And with my glaucoma, which has been for 5 years now, and it's getting worse, it's very helpful. My eye pressure has been, and I've talked to Dr. Behrman about all of this because he's my doctor also. So going to a place like the Compassion Center, being able to talk to a professional, talking about my own problems has been very helpful to me, and I would certainly want to continue to do it if it's at all possible. That's all I have to say.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joe Loebman. I'm 70 years old and I've lived here for 40 years. And I've been getting doctor's recommendations for cannabis for, I think, 4 years now. And for most of that time, I've gone exclusively to the Compassion Center. And there are a few reasons that are really obvious. I mean, its location, it's in a nice business district, it's quite accessible, there's ample parking, it's easy to get to. Also, when you walk into this place, their waiting room, their anteroom, is really nicely furnished. It's always clean, very clean, and it's well stocked with all kinds of educational materials. Like there are many booklets on use of cannabis with various medical conditions, and there are periodicals and pamphlets as to legal issues. But then inside, in the dispensary itself, it's also really neat and clean, and the people who work there are extremely helpful. Everybody is really knowledgeable about the wide variety of cannabis strains that they offer, as well as the other edibles products with THC in them. Just from an obvious standpoint, it's like a nice place to visit, but there are a couple of other intangibles that, very briefly, I live in a seniors mobile home park, Rancho Santa Barbara, and for a long time, my next-door neighbor was a woman who suffered from a variety of difficult medical conditions that made it very painful for her to get around sometimes. And the Compassion Center sent her a nurse who not only, at no extra charge, made the delivery, but also stayed with her for a while and chatted with her towards cheering her up. Another thing last year one time, on the day that my recommendation expired, I went to a doctor and I got a new recommendation. The following day, I went to the Compassion Center, and they have a thing when you put your ID in the slot, and then they buzz you in after they've checked you out. And when I was buzzed in, I immediately handed my new recommendation to the staff person on duty there, and he said, "I'm really glad you gave me that, because I was going to have to tell you that your recommendation expired yesterday and we couldn't help you till you got a new one." In other words, it was clear that they were interested in doing it the right way and in playing by the rules. So, okay, my last sentence. The Compassion Center really has compassionate people, and they play by the rules. They want to do it right, and therefore I would hope that you would accept this recommendation and give them their permit.
Okay,
that's all
great.
I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Stephen Jose?
Just yesterday, I was seeing one of my HIV patients who was actually a new patient to me who's on 8 different medicines for their HIV care. And they were having problems with insomnia and major gastrointestinal disturbances. And spontaneously asked me if I thought cannabis might help his condition. I acknowledged that it would, but I really didn't have any expertise to tell him which strains of cannabis would work or would be best for him. He was telling me some that he'd obtained, kept him awake for 2 hours, and then he would finally go to sleep. And I tried to explain to him, I'm sure that there are people who know much better than I in Santa Barbara at the dispensaries who can help them with this decision. There are people out there who are suffering if they do not have ready access to cannabis. And I have been to the Compassionate Center. I walked in and I wish I had a doctor's office that looked as good as their waiting room does. We need this in Santa Barbara, and the people deserve to have access to it.
Great, thank you. Is it Heather? Heather Hammett?
Good morning. My name is Hawther Hammett.
Hawther.
That's fine. I'm here in support of my medical cannabis collective, the Compassion Center. I've been a member of the collective for almost 10 years. In that time, except for the incidents that I heard of today, in all those years, I never heard of any other incident ever involved with this collective. Also, I would like to say, before I continue with my notes, that during that very short time when the federal government was hassling all the landlords and was making some of the collectives relocate, our collective never stopped operating. Never stopped operating. So the fact that it might have been a short period where it wasn't operating out of the building is not of any consequence as far as I'm concerned, because I never quit getting my medication during that time. I've chosen to make the Compassion Center my collective for many reasons, but one important one is security. Even though I've been a patient there for almost 10 years, I have to go through the same strict security procedures as any new person. In February, my recommendation will have to be renewed. At great expense every year, I might add. And they will still call the doctor to make sure I'm a legitimate patient when I bring that in, even though they know me quite well at the dispensary. There are cameras everywhere. The location is very discreet. There is no sign. It meets all the requirements of the new city ordinance. And in other words, so it is very well regulated. And a lot of us worked really hard over the last year to help draft an ordinance that would make these places very well regulated. And I feel like the Compassion Center has really met all those requirements. The staff, including the registered nurses, who are just so helpful, you can't believe it, is very consistent over the years and very professional. I'm treated with dignity there. As Dr. Bierman said, there might be some other collectives that might seem more like a tattoo parlor in some cities. I would not personally feel comfortable going to any place like that. Okay, I'm wrapping up. So, in my opinion, the Compassion Center is a true model of how a medical cannabis collective and dispensary should operate. So I appreciate you granting the permit. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I don't have any more speaker slips. Is there anybody else? Okay, you can come up and then fill out a speaker slip. Do you have one here? Did I pass you?
No.
Okay. Oh, you want one? Okay.
I just wanted to speak to 2 points briefly, and that's that being two of the longest run dispensaries or the 2 longest run dispensaries in Santa Barbara, we have known for Patrick and the Compassion Center for now nearing over a decade, and I believe that the level of experience that you will see, what you want in Santa Barbara is you want the experienced collectives. And I believe that their collective also offers that. I also believe that with regards to the 30 days, it was on the heels of federal intimidation. And again, as Hather said, we don't stop helping our patients just because there's federal intimidation. There is perhaps another way that it had to happen instead of being at that location, but I believe that that is an unfair criteria, and I just wanted to speak to that for them. Also, just in the opposition that has been shown against them, I'd also like to remind people that have problems against dispensaries and collectives that we are also parents. Patrick has 2 children. I had recently become a mother, and I don't believe that that precludes us from being really responsible actors, and I know that Patrick has done everything he can in all these many years to make sure that the security of his dispensary is very good, and that all of us wouldn't do anything ever to hurt children or to allow that to happen. So I just want to make that really clear.
Okay, great. Thank you. So is there anybody else who would like to address the hearing officer? Okay. I received these are the same. I received 8 letters from the surrounding neighborhoods, attesting to the fact that they haven't had any issues with nuisance or loitering in the area. And then I received a letter from Jeffrey Briggs in opposition to the medical cannabis, and then also from Paula Westbury, who I think you had heard me say she monitors all our agendas and
Sure.
regularly
I
sends
haven't met
letters
her,
to us.
though.
Okay, yeah, she is.
Is this for me,
You
or
can
is
keep
it?
it, yeah. You have a copy? Oh. We can make a copy.
Okay.
And so with that, I close the public hearing.
Ms. Reardon, can I make a comment?
I'm going to ask you some questions, and it might be covered during the
Okay.
time. In regards to security on the site, with the there's a plan in here that just kind of generally has some statements in it, but then it talks about security cameras and motion sensors, and in the written documentation it says there's 6 cameras. On the plan here, there shows there's about 13. How? Can you describe your security plan to me?
Sure. Well, currently there are 6 cameras, and that Captain Martell reviewed the 6 cameras. We're going to augment the cameras in the facility once. This model here is assuming there's a permit and assuming this is the way it will be run, contingent on our plans. So we have all these cameras, and the incident in 2010 was someone trying to take a crowbar to the back door, and so we videotaped that, and you could see that there was some effort put in, but there was no entry. And Captain Martell and I have discussed the idea that he mentioned the bars and the sensors at one point, or we talked about his idea was that there should be bars. And I mentioned to him that there is a giant drywall through here. I also understand that potentially that is an area of vulnerability. So the idea of putting sensors in here, in these windows, is going to be added to our security plan. I talked to Captain Martell about not putting bars on there because of the stigma and the feel of the building. When you're driving by with all these bars, it felt a little ghetto, and the aesthetic was kind of, in jeopardy. And since they'd have to go through the window, and then through walls and drywall, that would be quite a bit of effort, and the alarms would sound. So we're going to augment given the communications I've seen from what needs to be accomplished, we're going to put sensors in all these windows that'll be tied into the bay alarm system. We're going to augment the cameras We're going to augment the cameras that match these descriptions in here to have a complete line of sight on this side of the building, a complete line of sight on this. We've put in a motion detector here and motion detector here so that if there's any movement at all, that these would be illuminated and they could be caught on camera. We haven't put a motion detector in here, and so our plan, even though it doesn't call for it and we haven't mentioned it, given this new questioning, we feel we should put one here as well. So this is the one place that's missing a lighted motion detector. So we would augment our security with sensors on the windows, augmenting the cameras like is described in this plan, another motion sensor here, and in terms of the cannabis being stored, we would turn this particular room in here and also this particular room in here into augmenting the amount of cannabis that can be stored here at once. This door is the first of my knowledge that this needs to be somehow removed, which only addresses the concern we had with this door in the first place. And so there's going to be, as I understand it, a need to have a solid wall here. The dispensary has, let's say for instance, if someone were to come through the front door, through, let's say, thank you, through the front door, well, the bay alarm would give us a call. They have all three managers' numbers, and they'd also call the police department. They'd also have to then make it through another locked door, and then another locked door. If they were to come through the rear, they'd have to go through this locked door. This door is not currently locked, and they'd have to go through this locked door. So because of the augmenting the cannabis storage in the facility, we would then put a locked door here so that now they'd have to go through one locked door, two locked doors, a third locked door potentially, four, and a fifth. So I think that's strong enough in terms of, in 2007 we learned when we thought we had a piece of glass that was bulletproof or shatterproof, and it didn't live up to that particular calling, and we've since changed that. So anytime there has been something where there's a need to be addressed, we've always taken that quite seriously and have taken that to heart and made the changes. So I'm not sure if that answers or...
It did. It was a discrepancy, so I wanted to clarify to what was actually proposed, because this should be what you're planning on doing
okay.
In the future. So that's why I was questioning what. So that was a good explanation. And then, in regards to the loitering and the nuisance, I know you've submitted letters from your neighbors saying they haven't had any problems. What steps are you doing? How are you controlling them?
Well, we haven't had any loitering or nuisance issues. Basically in the application we answered by, in a sense, parroting the paragraph above, because that's what I was advised by Mr. Gullett in order to communicate that loitering and nuisance issue. We have a clear statement that, and if anybody, because we have a camera in the back, so we know if anybody's hanging out in their cars or what have you. For some reason, there's been a tremendous amount of respect, either because the diligence and the authoritative qualities of the nurses, and they're quite strict, and they handle most of the day-to-day, and so there's that. We know if anybody, let's say, parks on the side of the building or is somehow shown in disrespect somehow to the community or the neighborhood, we'll alert them. But to be honest with you, we haven't had any kind of, there's not been one incident of graffiti. There hasn't been one incident of vandalism. There was an incident in which parts of the street, got some tagging and stuff like that. Usually, for some reason, our neighborhood hasn't been a real victim of tagging and that kind of thing. I don't think it's fair to say that the dispensary's location and how discreet it is somehow the source of this particular trouble. And the way we would address, let's say, any kind of loitering or nuisance issues is that, well, one, we don't have any nuisance issues. I talked to some the neighbors, and some of them were not even aware that this was a cannabis dispensary or a collective in the first place, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't know," and so hopefully that answers that particular question. And at that particular time, since I'm asked for that loitering and nuisance issue, I'd like to address the Jeffrey Briggs letter. Is that all right at this moment? Because
sure.
I just received this yesterday, and that there's two telling things. One, if someone's looking at the building, at the old Jensen's guitar, and Mr. Jensen's going to write a letter basically discussing his time there at Jensen's, and that we weren't a problem, and that's what's coming. But it's only 100 feet down, and if Mr. Briggs and his partner had been looking at this particular place, and somehow our place is so inconspicuous, or that there was no idea that it was there, and like he said, it was only until he received a letter. And so there's a few things that I want to address. One, I want to quell any kind of thought that somehow the stigma of cannabis is somehow going to affect parents and kids. I could go on the attack and say, well, there's a yoga studio down the street. There's a CVS, which distributes drugs, which is the largest killer of accidental deaths in the United States aside from car accidents. And that's the legally distributed medicinal pharmaceuticals. And so I think that also the word pot shop and these kind of things, this derogatory language, I think, even though I understand because someone's trying to make a case, especially an attorney is trying to make a case, I understand this, so I don't take any offense by it. At the same time, I want to assure that if we do become a neighbor, that the other yoga studio down the street wrote a favorable letter and that they've had no troubles. And the idea that this is going to be full of kids and stuff like that, I kind of put into question a little bit, because I feel that's just an added thing, thinking that we got to stay away from the kids and women, and somehow it has an adverse situation. If I didn't know so much about the medicinal aspects of cannabis and how it helps people, then I could potentially side or say that yes, I understand your fears, because that's the way it's parroted through the newspapers and what have you. But I just wanted to say that as a neighbor, we'd be completely respectful and cooperative. And if this person were to ever move in, that would be fine. If for any reason we have a permit and it would be appealed, the idea that somehow they would leave Santa Barbara, which is echoed in this letter here, when there's so many different vacant spots, if they really did have a problem with there being a dispensary, there's so many other different spots in town that could accommodate a yoga facility if they have any fears. But as someone who's been in town for quite some time, 25 years, this is 5 blocks from Cottage Hospital in Sampson. This is in an area where specifically we went towards because of accessibility for handicapped and because of the location to the physicians and the oncologists that I work with.
Okay. Another question I had was on page 17 of your operational plan, location operation requirements, and it talks about other products that you're proposing to sell. It says, has no plans to sell specific products, goods, or services in addition to the provision of medical cannabis except for literature, clothing, and storage jars. What are your storage jars?
They are jars that you may have seen on the site visit the other day in the front case. And these are jars that are airtight so that the cannabis would stay fresh and have a maximum opportune time for the patient, especially if they have a certain quantity for a while. The cannabis degrades in light and through oxygen exposure. And so it's just to facilitate the patient if they want a jar for storing cannabis. There's nothing more than just
Storing, not hiding or...
No, it's not. No, that's a good question. It's not a jar that conceals the cannabis in any way, which they do sell, and I've seen those particular jars that hide things. This has nothing to do like that. These are more akin to a mason jar, and these are not even opaque. These are clear. Mm-hmm. So it's mainly about the way that they seal and they lock down more than, and that's all it is.
Is this something you can buy at other places, or CVS, or is it?
You could probably buy it at like Osh or Long's, like mason jars. You'd have to then some of the jars that we sell we get through a special distributor that has these jars have a heavy bottom so they don't fall, and they have a seal, a plastic O-ring, let's say, that when the top is put down it actually seals and encloses it.
Okay.
And I'd be glad to submit some jars or bring them by.
Oh, it's okay. I was just reading. Our ordinance doesn't allow selling of drug paraphernalia. When you look at the Health and Safety Code, it talks about storage jars and containers to conceal it. But that doesn't sound like that's what it's meant.
No, but if there
meant by the code.
No, and if there is a conflict or if there's a question in that, we could leave the storage jars out of the equation.
Well, how you explain to them, I think that sounds fine.
Okay.
All right, so those are my questions. Now we have to get down to the criteria. The first one has to do with operating consistent with the intent of the Compassionate Use Act and SB 420, and you've provided information illustrating how you comply with that. The second one is the location, and this also speaks to the concerns. And the police department has reviewed the area, and as the captain explained, it's not an area of increasing or high crime activity, and there hasn't been a significant number of calls. The size is adequate, and it would serve the needs of residents within proximity to the location. It's not prohibited by our code. It's actually in one of the areas that was outlined by the City Council as being allowed uses.
Yes.
And they looked at the various areas and distances between parks and what have you, and this is one of them that was expressly approved in the ordinance and with the submitted maps. And regarding 8 and 9, I think 8 and 9 are related. 8 is regarding all reasonable measures have been incorporated into the dispensary security plan or consistently taken to successfully control the patron's conduct for vandalism, crowd control, that kind of stuff, and as well as security. And you are proposing measures to increase the security on site. In regards to 9, I'm still, in regards to 9, staff's recommending or concluding that the project isn't consistent with that criteria. However, it was an off-site burglary, which now you're going to be required to store your product on site.
Yes.
And you're proposing improvements to your security plan, which the police department has reviewed and indicated that, with the enhancements with the bars or sensors in the windows, and then you're going to be removing the wall. I'm still not clear on. I don't know if you can further explain the concern relating to that with an enhanced security plan and the fact that they're going to store it on site. And they've tried to respond to the potential threat of burglaries or.
Well, really the basis of staff's concern is the negligence of the dispensary to operate in a responsible manner and adequately secure the product, and it's essentially about the behavior of the dispensary. We do think security will be enhanced with the proposed condition that all the materials be on site when provided by the collective, but it's history of behavior, and because the burglary was so recent, it does raise concerns with staff. So.
Okay, thanks. Then in regards to 10, any provision of the municipal code or condition will not be violated. You state you wouldn't violate it. You state you haven't made any false statements in your application materials. The one I continue to have problems with is number 12. And it seems like it could be easily to submit information showing that you were in this location.
Mhm.
I understand, okay, so you're hiding in the back, but you should have some receipts. The attorney's letter contains some suggestions on information you can submit to show that you were at this location for the whole time, and I haven't seen anything that shows that it is considered non-conforming and therefore legally operating right now.
Okay, well, I would like the time to submit those. There was a situation in which we had the first item really was, and this is no disrespect to anybody at this point, but the first item was that I got a call from Betsy Teeter, and Betsy stated that we were a new dispensary and we weren't the same as the other dispensary, and we were a new dispensary. And I explained to Betsy, I said, we're the same dispensary, there's been no other dispensary, and furthermore, there's a 2007 break-in which demonstrates that it's the same compassion center. I was at the call for the break-in in 2007. Then Ms. Teeter mentioned that we went to the place and there was another business there, and there was no negating that whatsoever. I was then shocked to find out that Betsy Teeter never entered the property whatsoever, so she has no idea what's inside. And so then that information, initially when this came about, I talked to both Steve Wiley and I talked to the mayor, and I said, this is going on right now. I said that, there's the ordinance committee and the city attorney are working on things. The next thing you know, someone else is coming in saying that we weren't a dispensary, and so all of a sudden now there's having to educate a whole other group of people, and plus I felt a certain amount of disrespect in a sense because of all the work that we have been doing. I finally phoned Steve and I said, Steve, Betsy needs to hear from you that there's no problem. Betsy who, he says. If I get a nickel for everybody that tells me that I can just say there's no problem, I'd be a rich man. Well, I find out from Mr. Cato that Betsy and Mr. Cato had met with the city attorney just days prior, so Steve's idea that somehow he doesn't know who Betsy Teeter is, I didn't feel was straight up. I talked to Steve again, and he goes, look, just have a call, I'm not sure if it was Betsy or whoever it was, but please have them just forward the file to my office. Just have them forward it to my office, and I'll take care of it. So then I communicated with Steve, and next thing you know, it goes to not Steve, but one of his assistants, Tava. And the first thing was, I want to see evidence that you were there out of this 30-day thing, which is in question to begin with, about how that got in there. So I went to the city business permit licensing office, and they wrote a letter showing that I had to maintain my business permit year after year after year at that location. That was number one. Submitted that. That wasn't sufficient in terms of satiating their needs. Then I wrote I'm not sure if you have it or not, but I wrote up an affidavit for patients to sign saying that they had come during this particular time in question. And I have about 3 pages of signatures of people who had verified that they had come. The language basically stated, did you come to this dispensary during this period? And they submitted their names. I submitted that. Next thing you know, I get a call or that the language at the top wasn't sufficient or wasn't the right kind of language. So then I have emails, correspondence on record 4 or 5 different times.
Okay, but what I need information, what they've saying here, if they've reviewed that and they say that's not specific or strong enough to be able to show that you've been there with the whole time without a 30-day lapse,
Sure.
then we need more information.
And I can supply that.
Okay.
There was just it was a situation really about, it was a situation, to be honest with you, Ms. Reardon, about a general respect and communication with Mr. Wiley, who I had been, and who I basically, he's an extremely intelligent man. He does a great job, I assume, for most of the time with the city up until maybe just recently because of all these lawsuits and what I've been witnessing myself in terms of him taking direction from the city council. And so it was this idea that I wasn't paying the respect, I wasn't giving respect back, and it became sort of like, what do you need from me? But the real issue was that when I asked the city staff, when I asked Steve, I said, if this language isn't sufficient, please provide me the language that is. And I have 4 emails that never got any response back. And then I sent a Word file that had my language in. I said, please correct this language. And I have all this documented. Please correct all this language so that I can have the proper language that you need. Okay? And then I'm glad that we found this particular item here. There's just one more. And then I've been calling to different people that have been providing us our bags and that kind of thing to ask them for their records to get showing that there was materials there that were sent to us at that particular time. So,
Well, like I don't see how I can find that it's consistent with our criteria. So I would be willing to continue you to be able to provide the information, or I could just deny it and you can go before the Planning Commission and present everything to them.
I would like, well, if given those choices, I would like a continuance in order to provide you with information and affidavits and...
Yeah, you'd be working with staff and then with the attorney's office in terms of establishing the nonconformity.
Okay, and at the same time, just sorry to interrupt you. At the same time, there's a jury scheduling for June of next year. At the same time, which isn't mentioned anywhere here, we're going to meet with an arbitrator sometime in February. I believe it's February 7th. We've all agreed to so far. I was talking to the other attorney who's handling the case for the landlord in order to try to bring that arbitration up sooner, because of all this particular time lapse. That's, first of all, our application that was in deadline has been postponed because we waited till after the Measure T. Heather and myself waited till after Measure T to continue the application process and update our application, because if Measure T had passed, or if somehow there was a ban from dispensaries by the voters, then our applications would mute. And so it was decided upon that we would wait till after the November election, and then once there was a landslide of support for dispensaries in the community, then that's when we re-augmented our file. So I would like the chance for that, and also to work with the city attorney's office to and potentially get more respect both ways. And
Okay, Mr. Carter.
I don't agree with Mr. Formey's characterization of it. I believe that he's been given any number of opportunities to provide the information that he says he will provide during this continuance, and he hasn't. I mean, we're going to court in June because he hasn't. And so I still recommend that you deny this, and then he can provide whatever information that he wants to provide to the Planning Commission if he decides to appeal.
And your recommendation would be to continue it. How long would you need to provide the information?
like 2 weeks. Does that work? Or, I mean, just because it's the holidays right now,
Mhm.
and because of the schedule that I have with family outside of town, that I would need...
And you have this information that they've requested, some of this information you can provide.
Yes, and also that would give me time to go back to Mr. Wiley, ask for the proper language that would be needed, and then talk to the people that were there at that particular time. Also, there's a business here in town that was supplying materials at the time to us that I could get the receipts from, or at least the proof of delivery. And then I could also, I understand where Mr. Cotto's coming from, because it's really, Mr. Cotto is very close to Mr. Wiley. They communicate a lot together, and I understand exactly where he's at. But I think there's another component, too, about just general respect that isn't in the equation. And so that any kind of 2 weeks would be sufficient. That would give...
We have the furlough closing. I think the best action for me to take would be to deny the application and have you appeal it to the Planning Commission and have it discussed in that form. And you can provide the information there. There's 7 of them that can... that would, they have 7 various opinions on what would be appropriate. But given there has been quite amount of time in terms of when asking for information and being provided, I'm not sure that it would have to be at least a month continuance, because if you submitted it for two weeks and then we reviewed it and then I just think the most expeditious course would be for me to deny the application, make the findings in the staff report, deny the application, and then you have the opportunity to appeal it.
Okay.
How
would it be if there was a continuance? Would a shorter time work?
No, I'm thinking it would be the earliest it would be able to get back on is the end of January.
Okay.
But I can't make any commitments in terms of reviewing the information that's submitted.
Okay.
And I think given I think I think that's the best thing to do.
Okay.
Is to deny the application. The appeal period is until January 6th.
Okay.
It's submitted here at the public counter at 630 Garden Street, versus the other appeals are submitted at City Hall.
Okay.
And then they'll get you on the Planning Commission agenda.
Okay.
And at the hearing, I would provide to the Planning Commission, the updated security plan showing how you have responded to the recent events. Number 9.
Okay.
What steps you've taken in terms of augmenting your security plan. You're now removing the back door, and then also the information that they need, because they're going to be in the same quandary as me with number 12. The establishment, whether it's a non-conforming use or not. So they will get all the information I received, and I would recommend that you augment the informations in those 2 areas specifically.
Okay. So the security plan and addressing the 30 days.
Not the 30 days. 30 days is in the ordinance. That's not what you have to show is that you've been in operation continuously over that period. That you didn't cease operations for more than 30 days.
Mr. Erden, just so both you and the applicant understand that the staff position is really based on this plus the break-in at the self-storage facility. But primarily, we don't have a problem with how the facility has been run. There has been no complaints about it. It seems to be a professionally run organization, and like I said, we haven't received any complaints. So it's not about the running of this dispensary per se, operationally. It's more they didn't comply with the old ordinance, and given the enforcement case, I think it was 2 letters that actually informed Mr. Formey that if he didn't comply, either cease and desist or provide us with the adequate information, that we would recommend denial. Staff would recommend denial of his application, and that's the basis really. And because of that, we can't make the finding on number 12.
Well, I think that's what I've said to you too. That with the condition that it's going to be stored on site, and the fact that you have enhanced the security on the site, I think 9, working with the police department, we can get over 9. It's the 12th part with the non-conforming. How if the city's determining that it's not non-conforming, it's operating now in violation of the code, which then I just can't find it meets that criteria.
Sure, I understand. So the proposal is basically there's a couple different options. One is to satiate the needs of the city attorney's office to the point where they rescind their case against our dispensary and the landlord. 2, provide enough evidence for that to either occur. 3, to have enough evidentiary material in front of the Planning Commission to make their assessment, regardless of the city attorney's office. There's a bit of...
They're going to be in the same quandary as me, that if it's not considered non-conforming, it's operating illegally, so they'll have that number 12 to contend with.
Okay.
So.
That's understood. That's clearly understood. And and I appreciate Danny's remarks, because there has been an enormous amount of time put into doing something properly, and we're viewed in extremely high regard at the Attorney General's level. And there has been an enormous amount of ebb and flow in city politics and so many changes. And Danny's been a victim of the constant changes that occur, because I've witnessed the amount of effort that Mr. Cotto has put into this, and I've been quite impressed. So I don't really have an adversarial feeling for he or Dan, because Dan has been exceedingly kind with his time, and generous. He's very upfront. There's nothing hidden, and I feel comfortable discussing things with him. At the same time, with Danny, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the level of intelligence and insight, and when I watch him at these ordinance committee meetings, because Danny can attest, I've been at most of them with him, I'm always impressed, I think that Mr. Wiley has put his bias into these ordinances, and he has been less impressive over time to me, even though I like the man as a person. I think he's exceedingly smart. I think that some of his actions, as of late, has a blowback effect on our city, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So, like I said, there is the 10-day appeal period. Since it is a denial, the Planning Commission has oversight of all my actions.
Sure.
But since it's denied, it won't be called up.
Okay.
All right.
So, for my knowledge, then, I have till January 6th to formally
submit the appeal letter. And it's again here at 630 Garden Street. We've had people go up to City Hall before, and they send them back here and get in the runaround. So I just want to make it clear that it's here. Yeah, and you can work with Dan, submit it to him. Okay, thank you. I adjourn the meeting.